going to be talking about distributing your glassware. We're going to talk about two things. One, what is the review process? And then two, what's new? And this part's going to be pretty awesome. And then at the end, I did leave some time for Q&A, so we can talk about that. I am Timothy Jordan. I'm a developer advocate working on wearables at Google, and that's Jeff Harris. Jeff just found out how to get here. Jeff is a product manager for platform on Glass, and he's going to be joining me for Q&A at the end. OK, so let's dive right in. In the last 6 months, the catalog of glassware on My Glass has grown 80%, which is pretty fantastic. And in the last month alone, we've launched more glassware than we have in the previous 5. And it's not all the glassware that people are experimenting with, but rather these are the ones designed and refined against our best practices. And there's even, in fact, there's a lot of glassware in review today that we know you're going to love. So let's just get right into it. Why have a review process at all? Well, the reason is simple, but I'm going to give you some more detail. We want to launch lots of awesome glassware. Now, lots is pretty straightforward, but the awesome, that actually requires, that's the hard part right there. Now, there is a common goal with app stores. Everybody wants to have lots of great software for their platform, and there are all sorts of review processes. And we took a look at these before we designed our review process. You could have, at one end of the spectrum, no review at all, right? Just let everything that comes up, says hi, onto the store, and it gets launched to users. On the other end of the spectrum, you got this black box review, right? You submit your software for review, and you get a yes or a no, and you have no idea why, right? Both these models exist out there as for app stores. The glassware review process isn't at either end of that spectrum. In fact, you could sort of say it's not on that spectrum at all. It's based on the idea that we can help developers create amazing experiences on Glass. And in fact, it'd be crazy not to help them. And it's also an opportunity to understand more deeply what you're doing in this early phase of Glass and glassware. We learn from the review process, and we use those learnings to directly grow the platform and product improvements. Now, when a new glassware comes in, we look for two simple things. First, is it safe for users? And ultimately, there's only so much that we can do, but we can use the glassware and do our best to make sure, at the very least, it does what it says it does. Right? It asks for appropriate permissions, that kind of thing. Now, this is sort of obvious, but we should do what we can in this area. The next thing, and this is the second out of the two, is that these two things are very different. Right? And in our experience working with developers and partners is that the tendency is to take an experience from the phone and just stamp it out on Glass. It's the same experience over there. But the thing is the paradigms on Glass and how the user interacts with it are remarkably different. Right? It's important for, I'm sorry, somebody's giving me hand motions and I don't know what, OK. You got to think about what's special, right? What can you do now that you couldn't do before? And then you got to do that. And the review process is there to help with that. Right? It's our goal never to say, no, you can't do that. Instead, any time where it's like, this is something new or this is outside the best practices, how can we say to the developer, yes, and? Right? It's this beautiful concept that we learned from improv where you build upon each other's ideas. Instead of saying no to developers, we help them adapt their ideas and their dreams for user interactivity to this new environment. Does it make sense? OK. Here are the steps involved. First, you submit your glassware. There's a form. You fill it out. No big deal. Then we have a conversation, and we offer assistance. All right? And this is the fun part. This is where you get the personal attention of a glassware expert, and sometimes the UX team itself, when there's new things going on, to help you make the best glassware possible. And then we get it launched out to users. Like, that's the process. All right, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Here's a few new things that we can talk about. First off, we're always trying to improve this process, right? How can we make it better for developers? How can we make it faster? How can we make it more reliable? How can we make all this glassware more awesome? One of the things that we silently launched just a couple months ago is that you can now submit both Mirror API Glassware and GDK Glassware, and MyGlass will support both. Now, some folks have gone through this process as we just sort of silently launched it. Others are coming along, and of course, we're ready for more. The next thing, another sort of small announcement, is that we've got a form for updating your glassware. So if you've got major changes and you want us to look at them, you'll be able to see this form on our documentation in the next few days.
Tips and advices. You can
You've already gone through the review process and you just need a quota increase. You can use this form for that as well. Okay. Now finally, a piece of feedback that we've gotten quite frequently is that the review process takes too long. Well, we agree. We would like it to go faster. And we examined it. The one place where everybody sort of agrees that it is taking too long is between submitting and getting that first round of feedback. And the way we handle this, as you saw in this diagram earlier, is that we assemble a whole list of feedback, and then we give that as one chunk back to the developer. But then what happens is that if there's any big things that change, we take another look at it, and we have this conversation about how to really make this glassware great and fit onto glass. Well, since we're having this conversation anyway, why don't we just start that conversation right away? So we're announcing that we're going to do earlier feedback. Now, what this means is that as soon as you submit your glassware, we're going to start reviewing it, and as the feedback comes in, we'll share that sheet with you, and you can see it as it comes in. So instead of waiting for the full chunk, right, as there's major pieces of feedback that we give you, you can start working on those right away. Okay, another way that we're going to help you get earlier feedback and speed up the whole process requires a new tool, so I'd like to talk about that. Now, many of you might have seen that there's this common visual language that I use in a lot of my presentations, right? It's this representation of the glassware flow. A tap goes down on this flow chart, and a swipe forward goes to the right, a swipe back goes to the back. And with this, it's a pretty simple and effective representation of how the UI or the user experience is on this glassware. Now, I do this in Keynote, and it takes me a while to get this all right. We've built a tool, and it's going to be available to you very soon in beta on the documentation site. It's called the Glassware Flow Designer. Now, the cool thing about this is that you can just jump right in, and you can put in HTML or screenshots, and then very quickly build this flowchart about how your glassware works. And it saves all the files to Google Drive, so you can just share them like you do any other file to everybody you're working with, and you can collaboratively edit this together. Now, our hope is what you're going to do is you're going to build these right away, even before you start developing, right, as you're thinking about this idea, and that you're going to send this our way. So we can take a look at it even before you've started building things, and we can give you those major pieces of feedback, right, that we often deliver to people who submit glassware for the first time, even before you start building, to make the whole process easier, to make it even faster from idea to launch, not just submission to review to launch. So that's the new things that we're doing. You like that? That's good. We're reviewing Mirror and GDK Glassware, available on MyGlass now, and anybody can submit both of those. Earlier feedback, we're going to get you the feedback as soon as it starts happening. We've launched this Glassware Flow Designer, which is really going to help you design your glassware and collaboratively design that glassware very early on, even before you start developing, and that you'll be able to send this our way so we can get you that expert feedback even before you've started going down a path. Right now, a very common piece of feedback is that sometimes people use an immersion when they should really use a live card. That's the kind of thing you want to know before you build the immersion. So we really want to help with that. And our resources are on developers.google.com/glass/distribute. I hope that you'll join us there and ask questions. If you add a /glass/community, you can reach any of us, and we can talk about it there as well. Okay, and with that, I'd like to bring Jeff up on stage, and we're going to do some questions and answers. I have another microphone. In fact, could I get somebody to help? Would you mind? Thank you, Hoy.
Hi there. One tool that I use on the Play Store a lot, both within my own team and with the testing apps of the broader user base, is the beta and alpha channels. Have you thought about bringing anything like that to the Glass store?
Yes. So we have some capabilities like that already. If you submit glassware to us, we can whitelist that glassware for just a Google group or an individual set of users, and we're pretty willing to do that.
Okay, that's great. Just one other question. What sort of crash reporting tools or aggregated stats do you currently offer through the MyGlass store, like from the developer side?
So our UI stuff for that isn't that great. We do tend to communicate to developers when we see the crash reports. So if we see your app crashing a lot, we will reach out and let you know. But there isn't a proactive way for you to get that information.
So do you recommend that we use other tools like Crashlytics or maybe other third parties to collect stats if there's not like a tool built in?
I think that's generally a good idea.
Okay,
yeah.
all right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Tilanka. This question is related to the. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This question is related to like the hardware part of this. Nothing major seriously, but can you find a mechanism, do a simple thing to this glass, and let people know when you go to a restaurant or somewhere that this camera is not on? Because I hate to remove it when people like, you need to remove that. So as a mechanism, just put people can see that the camera part is closed and it's not going to record. Still, I can review my emails, like check who sent me a message on. So it's just like something like the universally accepting, okay, the camera is covered. So don't worry, you don't have to remove that at a restaurant or a bar, pub, or even when you walk to the restroom. Sometimes I accidentally walk, I have to go back. So that can you do that? It's just, I don't think it's a major hard problem, but I think it's just a suggestion. It will be helpful to everyone, I guess.
Thank you. So just for the people that might not have heard that, it's a feature request. Definitely appreciate that. We, of course, can't comment on any future features or where we may go in that area. But if you do have feature requests, definitely welcome them. Next question.
So one of the things I was really excited about when you said soft launch was Mirror, GDK, combined apps. And I know one of the things you had was the Authentication Flow, where you can have a Mirror app that then authenticates the GDK by creating an account on Glass. And I know right now the requirement is you need to submit before you can try any of the account stuff on the device.
Yeah, so this is how that works. And there are some challenges in here, and I think we could provide some more tooling over time. But if you want now to have a GDK glassware that has an account and authentication, therefore, you don't need to use the Mirror API. But there is a RESTful API that you hit where you send the account information to Google, and then when the APK is delivered to Glass through MyGlass, the account is as well, so it's available to your application when it starts up. The sort of shim that you can use now is you can use ADB to send this account to Glass yourself. Right, so you can test all the components of getting the user up to the point where you would send the account information to Google, and then you have to plug the device in and do ADB and send the APK. And then when you do bring your glassware through to the review process, part of what you'll get is the ability to test that on MyGlass before you launch. Yeah, but you will need that shim up until that point.
You try to never say, no, you can't do that on Glass.
Yeah.
Have you actually flat out rejected any apps? Have you ever had to say that?
Well, we do have developer policies, right? And remember I talked about user safety, but also like you got to comply with the developer policies and the API terms of service. And when we see something that doesn't, we will say no, right? And an example of this, what's a good example?
Like one example is we don't let apps launch that use the camera without turning the screen on for kind of the concern that you get at. Like we want some visual indication that the camera is running, so we wouldn't let an app launch if it didn't do that.
But where we'd give the feedback is that we'd say specifically that, like yes, you can use the camera, but you need to have the screen on. So it's adapting the idea to the glassware and glass world and way of doing things. Question down here.
I submitted a glassware 3 weeks ago, and I'm still in the too long part of your flowchart.
Yes.
I was thinking about what about giving, because I assume like you looking at ton of different things about the app at the same time, like giving like more transparency, says, because for example, you can reject apps or like say like there's a problem with app like from the very beginning. For example, if the content is offensive, Or why not say like your app was approved for that, and now we are checking this part. We're checking. I don't
That's
know.
exactly what we want to do with the earlier feedback. One of the we look at a lot of the big things that we can recognize quickly that are often sort of done wrong or that we can help with, and we give that feedback as soon as possible. There is some glassware that's sort of in this place where we had kind of a long queue that hasn't gotten that early feedback yet, but we're working hard to work through that backlog and get that out as soon as possible.
And second question
And
is
we're also growing the team and scaling up to meet some more demand. And it's interesting how like the glassware submissions have grown over time. We also want to grow the team to be a bit more responsive to that as well.
And out of curiosity, how many glassware submission did you receive? More or so? More?
I don't have that number with me today. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, I have a question about the standby mode. In the before XE18, I think there was no visual feedback on the display, so it was great for saving battery. I would put it on standby. I would take pictures and record videos and saving battery. And now with the XE18, the display turns on, so I get the feedback, which is great. But then I lose battery faster. What's up with that? Is that something for the privacy issue you mentioned?
I'm actually not aware of that behavior change. So standby mode, you mean when you press the button on the side of glass. So that should turn off the display, and you're saying it doesn't.
Correct, yeah. So now it goes on standby mode, so I cannot tap anymore. But when I take a picture or record a video, the screen turns back on.
So every time you take a picture or record a video, the screen should turn on whether you're in standby mode or not.
Different question about upgrading a Mirror API to add additional permissions. So if you have a glassware that only does one permission and you have additional permissions, for example, the authentication, how does that user flow and then also the development flow work with adding new permissions?
This is a challenge. Jeff and I have talked about this a lot, right? Because you want to get permission for those things that you're doing with your application that day. And if you have another permission for some future feature, like it's weird to ask the user for that even though you're not using it right away. You really want just the permissions you're going to use and then expand. And this is an OAuth problem as much as it is anything else, is that whenever you expand permissions, you need the user to go through that flow again. A way that you can do this today is that you can notify the users in an appropriate way and just have them go through the flow again. It could be as simple as going to MyGlass and turning it off and on, or it could be like clicking a link that brings them to that flow, and then they just re-accept their permissions, which updates your token, and then you have those permissions. There's probably more that we could do here with MyGlass, and we're definitely exploring options around that.
Hi. I'm going back to the earlier question of using the authentication in GDK, and you gave a solution. Is there a way to find all this solution in somewhere in the help or use with GDK? Right?
Oh, yeah, you mean like to use the ADB shim to get the account on the device? Yeah. Tony, do you know if we have documentation on that? If not, we should probably get something together. I can make a post in the next 2 weeks. There is Android documentation about this. It's account manager stuff. Right, and there is a way to use ADB to get an account onto the account manager. Remember that Glass is built on Android, and whenever possible, we do things in the standard Android way. Okay. All we're doing with the GDK authentication is when we deliver the APK to the device, we also deliver an account that gets added to the account manager based on the credentials that you gave during the sign-up process. So all you're doing with the shim there is using ADB to add that account.
Actually, it's a problem with some of other GDK features and all. I can send you a list. We are struggling to how to test this without, before we publish it and all.
Yeah, I mean, before you get it into the review process, you need to test through ADB. That's the right way to do it. Once you get it in the review process, and Jeff was talking about how we can whitelist the glassware for specific Google accounts or a group or even a Google Apps domain. We can do that pretty soon in the process. So as soon as you enter that process and as you're working on feedback, you can also debug any account issues that come up.
Okay. My next question is there any plan to support Webview? Or is there a way to support Webview today?
a plan to support Webview. I'm looking at Tony and Jeff. I don't know.
You can use Chrome views today like you can on Android, right? Yeah. That stuff should all work just the same as it does on regular Android.
So is there anything special, or should we?
I mean, the interface won't look as good if you look on most websites because they're not as optimized for a small screen,
Yeah.
but it is the same rendering engine, so it should work just the same. It's KitKat MR1 version, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Excuse me, sorry.
At what point should we be submitting stuff for review? When it's totally complete, when it's feature complete, when we've got a really, really, we're really on the way and we're ready to add authentication? At what point do you want to start seeing it?
So given the announcements today, this is the right way to go about it, is you use the Glassware Flow designer to create a flow of how you want the UI to work. And this is part of your design process. Submit that before you start developing. And we'll give you feedback on the overall, like the big pieces of the application, if there's anything there to talk about. Then you start developing. The point at which you're in near final testing, you've got all your big pieces in place, and it looks the way that you want it to, and you start the testing and debugging phase, that's when you want to submit it to the Glassware review process, and then we'll be part of that process with you. All right, I think with time, we'll take 2 more questions.
Okay, so just a follow-up about updating APKs. So is it correct that the only way to do that is by basically resubmitting through that form? There's not a way to automatically add a new APK?
So if you're in the review process and you've made changes based on the feedback, you'll have a line to the team, and you can send them APKs through that, through email and other methods. Once you've launched and you have major features, that's when you're going to go to that update form that'll be live in the next couple days.
Okay, and those updated apps are automatically pushed to users' devices, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
One more question?
Hi, so I submitted an app to the Glassware Gallery about a month ago, and I haven't heard any feedback yet. So what's like the timeline to kind of hear feedback?
A month, unfortunately, is not atypical right around now. We've been kind of heads down with getting stuff ready for I/O, so I would expect you should hear in less than a month, but around a month is probably what most people have been experiencing over the past couple months. So I would expect feedback soon. If you tell me the app afterwards, I can check too.
And again, because of the announcements today, there's going to be earlier feedback. So our goal is to start getting you feedback much earlier than a month, and hopefully overall the process will take less time as well. So that's about time for questions. We'll be around for a few minutes afterwards. And if you have any questions about your specific glassware, Jeff and I will be around for a little while. Please do go to this URL, engage with the documentation, have a chat with us online. It is our goal to make the review process what developers want it to be. When we started building this review process, it was to help developers make as awesome the glassware they can and to help with that process. It's still the goal. We want to make it faster. We want to make it more helpful. And we want to get really awesome glassware launched. Thank you so much.
Thanks.